You're listening to the Rule of Life podcast by Practicing the Way. In each season, we explore an ancient practice from the way of Jesus and its relevance for the modern era. This is Season 4, Solitude. Okay, here we are, you guys. We are back after a full start. You just missed it. We had a beautiful 60 seconds, and then a fly
We were attacked.
landed on Bethany's forehead, and you would think she was just accosted,
I felt
she
attacked.
was very scared.
It honestly was so alarming. I thought it was going to fly into my eye.
So here we are. Now we're back again. And one final episode, Bryan and Bethany, it's such a joy to be with you. Thank you for your conversations over the last few weeks. And we thought it would be fitting to end the Solitude series with a Q&R. So Q&R, by the way, for those of you outside of Portland and the postmodern West, that's a little Portland quirkyism. So postmodern culture. We don't have question and answer because that would imply there's such a thing as objective truth and that we have the answers. God forbid. We don't actually have the
I
answers.
love it when you're sassy.
We have sassy. That word is not used of me often, but we have question and response.
I like that.
So we have some questions that have come in from all of you listening, and our team kind of combed through and picked out a few that kind of, categorize a kind of grouping of questions. And we thought we would just work through,
It's great.
chat,
Yeah.
and call it a day.
Sounds lovely.
Here we go.
We can do this, team.
We can do this.
Question number 1.
Hi there, this is Caleb from Avondale, Arizona. I'm a 30-year-old husband and father of 3 young children, and my question for the solitude practice is, what if I can't easily find a place where it's quiet to be alone? As a father of 3 young children, it's hard to find a quiet place, period, or a quiet time. But even when they're asleep or if I have a chance to get away, it's really hard even to find a place that is truly quiet in an urban setting. Find that everywhere I go, there's just noise and it's loud. Even outside my home, the sound of the street is noisy. So what do I do when it's so hard to get alone and to get quiet?
I know another father with 3 young
Yeah,
kids
I was gonna say.
Ew. Who could answer
Wow.
this?
occasionally has helpful thoughts on
Yeah,
the practice
occasionally.
of solitude. Sorry, that sounded passive aggressive. I did not mean it that way.
No, Caleb, first of all, I love that your heart is in that, being a father. I have 3 kids as well, 9, 6, and 18 months at the time of this recording. And I will say that it has been one of the most challenging things in this season of life with young kids is that your life is full of noise. And first, I think you approach the question even with such grace. And I think that giving yourself grace is a way to do it. But that doesn't mean don't wait until you have an easier life or experience for solitude to be a part of what you do, or sounds like silence. I know for me, and you kind of spoke to this a little bit, it has less to do with space and it actually has more to do with time. Like if you have roommates or if you have young kids, like I have young kids, and if I get up at 5 a.m., and even if that beats them by 30 minutes, I can have a quiet house. And that might be rare where I live. But if you have roommates or you live in a city, every city I've ever been in or lived in, there's always a time where things tend to be still. And I have found personally that if I have carved out a space of consistency, whether it be in the morning, and the mornings may not be the best place for you, but every place I've ever worked has had some kind of office or conference room or bench outside of a field or a public park where I can steal away for 10 or 15 minutes throughout the day. And at this season of life, it's probably really tough for you to get an hour uninterrupted of solitude. But carving those little moments of 10 or 15 minutes where you can just step away from the rhythm of your normal life and get that pattern of just slowing down, finding that you can come to stillness outside of the home might be the greatest gift. I know when I first started doing Science of Solitude, my very first place of doing a half-day retreat was on a bench that overlooked Corona Del Mar, Little Corona, by where we live. And it by no means was not quiet, right? Cars drive by, people walk by, but there was something for me that place just brought my soul to stillness. So don't judge it by how much volume around you is. It's really about the inner pace, the inner space, as much as it is about the outer noise. And I've come to realize, even if I'm easily distracted, which I very much can be easily distracted, I found that there are certain places where my eye catches beauty and I can just be fully present without the noise overwhelming me. So I think if you have a place in your city or in your town or near where you live, even like a backyard, where there might be a little connection to something just outside of the routine, that is a beautiful place to try to let your soul become quiet. I don't know what that says to you guys, if there's anything else you want to add.
No, that's
That's
really
great.
helpful. I mean, this
Mm.
may not be helpful because if you're a dad with little kids, you don't have a lot of extra days or overnight trips
Yeah.
lying around. But one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is how many monasteries and Catholic retreat centers are often proximate to cities and
Yeah.
within an hour's drive. And I remember, when we were in Portland, I was there for years before I realized there was that Jesuit retreat center
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
right off Division. And it
Yeah.
was just like off a block. And I'd
Yeah.
driven past it 1,000
Yeah.
times to go to dinner or ice cream and never even knew that there was a
Yeah.
beautiful
Yeah.
center right in the middle of the city
Mm-hmm.
that was 10 minutes from our church where you could book overnight for like
Yeah.
suggested donation of $30 or something,
Mhm.
and it was right there. And it wasn't the wilderness. It
Yeah.
wasn't, the best. I mean, the beautiful thing about Portland is you could just drive an hour and you're out in the woods,
Mhm.
But I do think finding,
Yeah.
again, that's not the short answer of,
Totally.
when the chaos of a weekly grind,
Mm.
but I do think look up. There may be
Yeah.
retreat centers, monasteries that have rooms that are
Mhm.
available, that are not far away.
When I visited cities that have more like great Catholic churches in the middle of the urban center, a lot of those places are open in the day.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and
the
they're
churches
still,
themselves.
Yeah.
and they are
Yes.
very good at like moderating sound. I've done it, like I've been working out of a library a lot lately, and there's a couple of spots in a library by us where no one is around. It looks out this beautiful window, and I have done short windows there of like 20, 30 minutes and been completely undistracted. So I think there is some creativity that you're tapping into that I think is
Mhm.
really helpful.
Yes.
Think outside that box.
Think outside of
Yeah.
that. Yeah, there's a Norbertine monastery down
Mm.
by you that I went to
Yeah.
once. And I just went to morning prayer. It was like at
Mm.
8:30, and the monks come in and do like a, Benedictine kind of Gregorian thing. And then they all left. And then I'm in this,
Beautiful.
400 person kind of cathedral
Yeah.
kind of thing. I'm the only there's one other like older woman up near the front, and we just sat there for
Yeah.
like 2 hours. It was so quiet. When it
Yeah.
gets so quiet that you hear like the inner ear ring.
Yeah.
You're like, you're
Yeah.
in silence when
Yeah.
it's like you hear the
That's true silence.
you
Yeah.
know?
Oh.
And I remember at one point I wanted to journal, so I pulled out my pen and I clicked it, and it was like
The
like you
loudest
could hear
sound in the
click, click,
world.
click, click,
Yeah,
click, click,
totally.
click, click, all through that
Yeah.
room. I thought, man, nobody is here.
Nobody's here.
Yeah.
There are millions of people within a 15-minute
Yeah.
drive of this place,
Yeah.
and it's me and one other person that are experiencing this silence. Doesn't cost a penny.
Mhm.
Anybody could walk in off the street.
Yeah. We have them
So-
all throughout Orange County.
Yeah.
Mm.
Amazing.
Mm.
All right, so let's take another question. This one is from Cecilia.
Hello, my name is Cecilia. I'm a mom of 2 girls, 6 and 3 years old, and I'm a full-time worker in a Christian school. I live in Vancouver, Canada, and my question is, how often should I practice solitude?
That's a great question.
It's a great question.
There's certainly not a right answer to that.
Mhm.
It seems to me that knowing your season is a key part. There
Yeah.
are certain seasons when a lot of solitude is required of us.
Mm.
I think in particular seasons of discernment,
Yeah.
and when we are discerning the will of God, in particular around, the last year we went through a year-long discernment process about where to move as a family, and I spent a ton of time
Yeah.
in solitude, not because I was virtuous, because I was like, it was not an easy decision.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
no clear path at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of like inner stuff I had to sort through in order to come to a place of
Mm.
detachment to
Mm.
really discern God's voice. So I think in seasons of discernment and seasons of healing,
Mhm.
we
For
need
sure.
a lot of solitude and a lot of community.
Mhm.
I don't know what else you guys would say. What other seasons do we need extra solitude, exhaustion, or after exhaustion?
Yeah, I think
you know?
after a hard run of something,
Yes.
there's wisdom in.
A lot of solitude. But then there are other seasons that call for kind of the bare minimum. Like when
Mhm.
you have, my
Young
sister
kids.
just had a baby 4 weeks
Oh.
ago. She'll be here tonight for
Yeah.
Sabbath dinner. she's not
Right.
doing a lot of like 3-day solitude retreats
Yeah.
right now. And neither is my brother-in-law,
Yeah.
and they are doing a lot of up in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
and it's a gift, but they're not in a season for long periods
Yeah.
of solitude.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so the same might be at the beginning of a new job or ministry or,
Mm.
or whatever. So I think know your season, and there's not a right answer. It's a moving target. Season of life, you'll have a lot less when your kids are little than if you're single, than if you're an empty nester. But I also just I think about solitude through kind of a 3-part grid of just daily,
Yes.
weekly,
Exactly.
and monthly or seasonally. So every day, this is not right. My personal, I want to begin my day
Mm-hmm.
in solitude
Yeah.
before I talk to another person, see another person, or look at my phone. I
Yep.
want to be with God in the silence. The Bonhoeffer line, like the end of our days belong to God,
Yeah.
and the beginning of our days belong to God in silence.
Yeah.
And then weekly, and for me, Sabbath is normally the best space in just our family's life and our family's rhythm. I have teenagers now, so they're really noisy at night. We went from like, I can't get morning time to now it's like, I can't go to sleep. So I get nice morning quiet. They sleep
that's
until
so
noon
good.
on the Sabbath, but I don't get enough sleep during the week
Yeah.
because they're up
Mhm.
late. But the Sabbath for me is the best. I need a space where I have more unhurried time,
Yeah.
where there
Yeah.
isn't a like, hey, I have to be on the Peloton bike and in the shower by 7:05,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just, hey, I'm here
Mhm.
and I have time, and the slow process of emotions coming up
Mm.
can come up in an unhurried way,
Yeah.
So for me, that's normally Sabbath. And then I always want like seasonal kind of longer times in solitude,
Mhm.
a day or overnight, or, I actually just got back from just a night away. And it was just
Mhm.
wonderful.
Mm.
Went out to the woods and it was 24 hours. But, first I got there and I'm just tired. So I sleep for the first hour. I'm like
Yeah.
not a nap
Yeah.
person. And I got there and I did not realize how tired I was. That
Yeah.
happens a lot when I go into solitude.
Yeah.
My exhaustion catches up to me. And then frankly, I just felt like angsty and itchy and kind of bored for 3 or 4 hours. Like, what am I doing here? I have so much to do. I have a
Hmm.
podcast on solitude to
Yeah.
record in 2 days. And then, went to sleep. And then that next morning just began to really hear
Mm.
God's voice.
Mm.
And it's just there's just some things that happen in extended periods of solitude.
Yeah.
I would never say they're impossible in shorter time periods. They're just really good. So I'm not saying you need to do that much solitude. I'm in a season of life where I need a lot of
Yeah.
it right now.
Yeah.
But I think thinking about it seasonally and thinking about like a small bite-sized daily experience,
Yes.
some kind of a weekly, a little bit longer, just you're there with God.
Mhm.
And then periodic, which may be once a year for you, maybe once a month, times where you really go away.
Yeah.
Mm. When I feel the internal pressure of other people's expectations of me that seem to be pushing against something that's more of a natural response that I have, that's when I'm like, oh, I'm wearing these roles too greatly, and I need some
Yeah.
time to retreat. That's been a marker that in journaling and doing the daily examine where I can
Mhm.
notice a pattern.
That's a good insight. So you're saying
Yeah.
for you, it's a little bit less about the rhythm,
I have that, but
but it's more about in the healthy sense of response.
yeah,
Like, hey,
Mhm.
this thing just came up.
yeah.
I need to go spend some time in
Yeah, like if
solitude.
I'm a month away from like doing a longer retreat or something, but I'm noticing this sting where I'm actually responding out of anxiety or out of an expectation that I feel rather than what's really in me. Well, then it's like I'm wearing too many
Mhm.
labels
Yeah.
or faces, and I need to remind myself, be reminded away with him what he's inviting me to be in a season.
You know what that brings up for me?
Mhm.
One way that I think, I'm just realizing this now, I don't think I've ever named this, but that I do exactly that, like a solitude and response, is whenever I feel a word from God, especially if it's through another person, whether it's a prophetic word or even a
Mhm.
line in the sermon that I've just felt
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, that's like
That's
a
for me,
watershed
yeah.
moment for me, or a line in therapy or spiritual direction. Like we've had those moments where just
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
really had a profound experience with God or word
Yeah.
from God. And then what happens to me all the time is like, wow, that's amazing. And then I just keep
Go
going
about it, yeah.
in the
Yep.
busyness and
Yeah.
hurry and distraction of life. And 3 days go by and I don't
Yeah.
even remember what was
Yeah.
said. And there was this life-changing
Yeah.
Yeah.
word from God that just in the busyness of my life, I just blew past.
Yeah.
So Trevor Hudson, who's a professor I had for a while on Ignatian spirituality, had this great line. He said, "We don't change from our experience. We change when we reflect on our experience."
Yeah.
And in context, he was, teaching on the Ignatian Examen,
Yeah.
which is kind of like a daily 15 moment of solitude
Yeah.
where you reflect. And anyway, I think the wisdom there is sometimes when I really feel a word from God, from a person or something, I will just slip away. I'll say, I'll need to get time this week. I need even if it's just an hour
Yeah.
Yep.
to go. I need to journal this.
Yep.
I need to sit with it. I need to
Yeah.
kind of let it sink into my body.
Yeah,
I need
deeply.
to get it deeper into me.
Digest
Otherwise,
it.
I will just blow right past it,
Yeah.
Yep.
The Holy
so,
Spirit, how can I respond to
Yes.
that? You know,
And
just the
then,
waiting
yes,
in that. Yeah.
giving consent,
Yeah.
listening.
It's
What do you
good.
want me to do about this, if anything,
And what
Mm.
else should I know? I mean,
Yeah.
What, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
powerful.
I mean, again, these are just all,
Mm.
they're all pathways,
Mhm.
Okay, here's another question from Lisa.
Hi, my name's Lisa. I live in Surrey in the UK, and I lost my husband Paul when I was in my 40s about 11 years ago. I have a question about solitude, and my question is, how do you embrace being alone with God and deal with feelings of loneliness? Thank you so much for answering my question, and I have to say I absolutely love the podcast, which has really helped me in my walk with God.
Wow.
Wow.
Oh, Lisa.
That's a human.
I'm so
Isn't she
sorry for
lovely?
your loss.
Yeah,
Yes.
so lovely.
Wow. What a moment.
Man, what a question too.
Yeah.
I think a question that many of us hold when we're coming into this space, but uniquely so, I think, for many. I could try to jump in on this
Yeah.
one. I think, the key there is in the question you said, how do I embrace being alone with God and then dealing with the feelings of loneliness? And I think the first place is embrace, is starting with the embrace of like, how do I enter in? And I think we spoke to this on another podcast of just entering in honestly. I think that's the entrance. But when it comes to the loneliness portion of it, at least in my own experience, which has happened quite a bit, often when I think about solitude, I've thought about it because it is the lonely place, because
Yeah.
it is
That's
the place.
literally how Eremos is
Yeah.
translated.
Yes,
Yeah.
where I
at
am
times.
alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Often I have gone into solitude with the lens that because I'm going in alone, it will be lonely.
Mm.
But what I've found is in my going in alone with honesty, I've at least had that paradigm flipped on its head, that coming in alone actually meant I could experience encounter and embrace and communion in a way that I couldn't have anticipated, because
You felt less lonely, you're saying.
less lonely.
Which was not what you
Yeah. I
expected.
mean, simple way to say that. Yeah. Just I felt relationally met.
Mm.
And I think so often, that's part of the fear of entering into solitude is the aloneness of
Yes.
it. Fear of God for sure, but fear of self.
And of it putting us in touch with our
Yeah.
loneliness.
Yes. But I have found that moving into that, which I don't know that this answer scratches the actual itch, but I know from experience that alone and loneliness are not the same thing when it comes to solitude, and that it is a place of encounter where that loneliness is met with some kind of relational response from the relational God who wants to meet you. So that's what I would say. There's no perfect answer when it comes to this.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys have better thoughts, but I've just found in my own experience of living alone, being alone. I'm alone a good bit when I'm not doing ministry stuff, but that even amidst that, God has been really faithful in the aloneness to bring encounter.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, there's a line from Saint Jerome in the 4th century who said, "We are never less alone than when we are alone."
Yes.
But I think I do just want to counterbalance that with a yes. And I know you well enough, Bethany, to know you are not saying this. What we're not saying is spiritualize your loneliness.
No.
And,
Yeah.
only God can satisfy your loneliness. So just go be
Yeah.
alone with God and you'll be
No.
fine.
No.
And
Mm.
that's a half truth. It's not a lie. It's a half truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are relational beings created by a
Yeah.
relational God for relationship.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, Lisa, we are so sorry for the loss of your
Yeah.
husband
Yes.
and in such prime and early years in your life.
Mm.
And may God bring around you, and may you say yes to a community of
Yeah.
people
Yes.
that are not a husband, but are a family.
Mm.
Mm.
And may there are certain, I remember back in the day in the early 2000s singing that song, All I Need Is You. I
Mhm.
remember a theologian coming up
How's
to
it
me
go?
once
Could
and
you do it
saying,
for us?
no, I'm not.
Okay.
I am not
We
going to
both
do it
tried.
for you.
Yeah.
I remember the theologian saying, that's not true.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
Genesis 2, it's not good
We're
for
made
man
for a
to be
family.
Yeah.
alone, And I think we're built for community,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and we're built for relationships. So there is a healing there. What people don't realize, and married people know this, but is that you can be married and still be deeply lonely.
Oh, yeah.
You can be surrounded by people and be deeply lonely. There's
Yeah.
something existential about it that goes to our alienation from God.
Mm.
So there is an assuaging of loneliness that comes in solitude that is extraordinary.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's also a built-in wiring in us
Yes.
to be with people. And this is where just solitude is one of a two-part back and
Yes.
forth. Solitude, community.
Yes.
Solitude, community.
And I
Mhm.
think even leaning into that, again, I mean, not even to speak to your story specifically, but there is something about like pressing into family, community in a season where grief might be surfacing in the
Yeah.
loneliness, because maybe loneliness isn't the feeling, it might be something else. And I think until we get
Mhm.
into that space to name it accurately as it sits, and then also not make it a somber thing. I think sometimes we can think of solitude and silence
Yes.
as this somber
Yes.
Yeah.
affair. And I remember a few years back, I was going on my first multi-day retreat. Again, young kids, it's very difficult to do that in light of other expectations. And I was so hungry. I was just like, I felt like even me, an extreme extrovert, was like, I cannot wait to just be alone in this space. And I remember the day before, I kind of canceled the monastery I was going to. And I said, I'm just going to get an Airbnb. And I feel invited to just have like a friend
Yes.
vacation, which sounds so lame and cheesy, I know, but it was one of the
Mhm.
best retreats. I went to an Airbnb. I actually went to dinner one of the nights out, and it was
Mhm.
like this playful, joyful friendship conversation.
Yeah.
Took 2 days and walked for 2 or 3 hours on the beach,
Mm.
and these long stretches. And I felt I must have been a madman. Like I was laughing with Jesus. It was this bizarre and beautiful reminder of that hunger in my heart for friendship,
Yeah.
that in one of the loneliest seasons of my life with friendships moving and things like that, I just felt like it was this simple reminder of like, you will never be too mature to just be with me as a friend.
Yes.
No matter how spiritual you think you are, like
Mhm.
how many times you do centering prayer, like this is home base for you.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it was just a sweet reminder that it can be a lighthearted place. And that weekend has changed. I mean, 2 years later has consistently changed my experience of prayer.
Mhm.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Feels like sometimes, what we call loneliness is really just
Mm.
our felt sense of we need a friend to help us carry our pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great way to phrase it.
And Jesus is our friend.
Yes.
And Bethany, you're my friend.
Yeah.
And Brian,
Yes.
you're my friend.
Yeah.
And Jesus made us to need all of that
Yeah.
friendship.
Yes. Mm.
Hmm.
All right, let's take another.
Hey, my name is O'Brien. I'm a student in South Florida, and I was just wondering what role nature has in the practice of solitude.
Mm.
South Florida, Bethany.
Come
your
on.
people are
I know
here.
it.
Is there there was
Feeling
no accent there.
connected.
Wait.
I'm feeling connected.
What I don't know, in South Florida, can you half the year you can't go outside, right?
Okay,
It's
you
like
can
you're
go
gonna get eaten by a
outside.
crocodile
Okay.
or die of heat stroke in 3
Or
minutes.
mosquitoes.
This is
No.
another conversation we need to have. I
So
don't.
it's a running feud between
It's
Bethany
the
and
interpretation of Florida. Crocodiles aren't even in Florida. I just want to say that.
Alligators.
I. Oh, gators.
Everything's air
Sorry, it's not alligators, it's
conditioned.
gators.
It's a
That's
tropical paradise. We've talked about
I know, but he said
this.
nature. Nature is
That's
not
why he's talking
air-conditioned,
about it, because this
Bethany.
man's in paradise. he's like, what's going on? I'm feeling it.
It's just
His assumption was in the month of January.
Yeah, totally.
First time I ever went
He
to
has
Florida,
one bad
it
experience.
was June, and I was like,
Yeah.
"This Lord have mercy."
People retire.
were
like
here?
pretty
people want to
impacted.
retire, and then I came back once in February. And I was
It's
like,
amazing.
"Oh,
Yeah.
all right, I get it."
Some of
Okay.
our dear friends just moved there, and they're in paradise.
They're
They
in
just love it.
paradise.
Come
I love it.
on.
Okay, well there it is. O'Brien, I think you're tapping into something I've been thinking about recently. Just in, it goes without saying, Jesus was not a monk. He did not go into a
Mhm.
hermitage or a
Yeah.
cave and hide there
Yeah.
for 20
Yeah.
years. he was a rabbi and a teacher who would regularly disappear out into the wilderness, into nature, as we would call it today. And, it's funny, like technically a spiritual discipline is just almost any kind of habit that you see in the life of Jesus that as some kind of a channel for grace. And I've been thinking like, because I came into teaching on the spiritual disciplines that has like a list of them, what are ones that I'm missing? Because they're not on the list. You know what I mean? That I'm like, wow, like, eating meals with community is not on a traditional list, but it's like one of the main things you see Jesus do.
Yeah.
He is eating around a table all of the time. And so that's, but one thing I've been thinking about is Jesus did a lot of what we would call hiking, or backpacking, or God forbid camping. I know camping is a mixed bag for people. I love it. But he would his time of solitude was normally walking or climbing a mountain. He would literally go out hiking, mountain climbing, camping, backpacking, and this modern language, not the language used by, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But he would go on long walks in the wilderness by himself. And I think especially for more kinesthetic type of personalities that are do a little bit less like breathing from the diaphragm and the half lotus position. And sorry, I mock that. That's my style. But people that are more, body-based, movement-based, they actually come to stillness better on a walk, or with their hands doing something than just sitting on the floor. And I think, I don't know, I just find nature to be the glory of God. I remember John Tyson, who's in Manhattan, said to me once, very vibrant prayer life, and he said, when I walk around the city, everything I see was basically made by humans. And so I measure myself and my accomplishments against other humans. But when I go out into the wilderness, everything I see was made by God. So I measure myself against God.
That's amazing.
And that there just is a perspective, I think, that comes. I just went camping last weekend up in 8,500 feet. It's beautiful.
Wow.
No sound other than the wind. It's extraordinary. There's just something that happens there, know? So I guess that's my way of saying, yes, thumbs up to nature, thumbs up to being outside as you can and again, it's free. Like a couple of years ago, I mean, Portland's its own thing because it's not a giant city in this beautiful Pacific Northwest that 3 months of the year isn't pouring rain. But in those better months, I just would do all my solitude, just like solo camping trips, just one night. I just drive out of the city, go up by myself, up into, government land and just spend the night. And it was just a little scary at times, but it's free. The beauty of that, it costs $5 in gas or whatever.
Yeah.
That's all,
Yeah. I think there's something to, and I don't know where this perfectly intersects with solitude, but there's something too, like what David was saying when he said the heavens declare the glory of God. And he talked about, there even being a thread of God's voice woven through creation.
Yeah.
And I think for me in my own experience, creation's a vital part of how I commune with God.
Yeah.
So when I'm entering into solitude, nature has had this profound ability to witness to me, like John was saying, about God's care, about who God is in a way that nothing else that I've done, even through the reading of the scriptures or other brilliant authors, but in a way that none of those even compare to what I'm experiencing through the voice of God in creation. So I think there's something about that, yes, allows you to compare yourself to God in this really magnificent way, but also to hear something intrinsic to creation and your own creation that connects in a space of nature and solitude.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful.
I mean, we're just come back to these practices are embodied.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're in a body, we're not just, we are a body.
Yeah.
And God made us to be in this world as his gift to us, Yeah, beautiful.
Yep.
Let's take another.
Hi, guys. My name is Shannon, and I'm from Colorado. My kids are grown up, and the last one is just about to graduate from college. So I find myself having a lot more time for practices like silence and solitude. My question is, how do you know that anything really happened if you come back from intentional time alone with Jesus and you're automatically grumpy?
What?
Come on.
What?
This is my kind of woman.
That if I was going to turn a question in, that would be
That's
mine.
the question.
How do I do so many spiritual disciplines and still I'm a grumpy
No.
dad and husband? Lord have mercy. Wow.
Oh, that's a good question.
Is it great? I mean, yeah, there's not going to be one answer to that. Let's start with the positive answer.
Yeah. Let's try.
I guess, let me say this. One of my favorite things that at first I hated and now I've come to love about the practices and how they function in our spiritual formation is they're certainly not formulaic.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's not like you go do this, put this input in, and
Right.
then the output,
Yes.
and then this happens.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
again, we're so formed by the modern world, by technology,
Yeah.
by digital technology in particular, to just everything is controllable, everything is quick and
Mhm.
fast. Half of it's free, and you just move your thumb, and boom, dinner shows up at your door 20
Yeah.
minutes later. And the soul does not work that
Yeah.
way. There's
Yeah.
no app for the phone, or
Mhm.
for the soul. And that's actually such a gift because I know myself that if it was that way, if it's like, hey, you do 45 minutes of solitude every other day, and then you are 80% better as a dad.
Yep.
If it worked that way, my relationship with God would so quickly devolve down to a transactional. Like, I
Yes.
do this regimen
Yep.
of spiritual disciplines, you do this transformation thing, cool, got it, onward and upward.
I think of like
And-
2 units of spiritual formation in, 2 units of growth out.
Yeah, but no, it's great. 2 units in,
Yeah, totally. It's
4
great.
out.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, let's throw a little grace
It's a
in
spirit,
there.
yeah.
And so it's such a gift that
Hmm.
the spiritual disciplines often don't work.
Yeah.
And I mean that a little tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meaning you often come back from a solitude retreat and get in a fight with your spouse
Mhm.
5 minutes after getting home. And there's a gift in all of that, the lack of the formula to it. But I think the other answer is, it's cumulative.
Yeah.
It doesn't map one to one.
Yeah.
You can't look at,
Yeah.
hey, I did solitude and I was grumpy or I was sad or I was anxious when I got home.
Mhm.
You have to look at it over a year, 5
Yes.
years,
Yep.
50 years.
Yep.
Hey, I wove this practice into my life, and over these 3 years, I began to mellow as a
Yeah.
whatever,
We're transforming.
Yeah.
So I think that's a thing I have to say to myself
Yeah,
very
not
often.
transformed.
Right. So I don't come back always transformed, finished, but transforming. And even what I do with the grumpiness when I return
Yeah.
is also an indicator of my encounter or my time away.
Yeah. And I mean, some of that is grace. Like, it's really easy for me to feel godly when I'm in solitude.
Totally.
There's nobody there to
one's
make me
interrupting you.
mad or
I'm
agitate
doing
me.
great, God.
I am so godly when I'm by
You wouldn't
myself.
believe it.
That's my introvert. All the extroverts are like, I don't get that. But all the introverts are like, yes.
Hmm.
And that's where, I mean, if the metric of spiritual formation is love, then that's good information when I come back and
Yeah.
I'm not loving. I realize that's like another
Yeah.
gift of self-awareness, a
Yeah.
gift of, oh, wow, the brokenness goes deeper than I thought,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and even naming what the grumpiness is, because being grumpy is like there's so many reasons. Maybe it's because you were in such, it was so peaceful, it was so serene that coming back to the chaos of life is that's good information.
Yeah.
Like the way that this structure of my life is not helping produce.
Yeah, I mean, it could actually
Mhm.
be an indictment on your life
Ex-
structure.
That's the
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
You know,
Not that,
and-
and that's hard to say. That's not too.
Yeah, because not all of us can just change our life
Exactly.
structure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
I think
some
there's-
of us can.
Yeah, and just to
Mhm.
notice it again without judgment in a way that
Yeah.
invites the spirit to say, "Wow, okay, like what about this was so frustrating? Is it wasn't fulfilling, and now I wasted time because I wanted it to be more significant, so I'm grumpy because I took whatever emotional margin to get my partner to let me go and do this or whatever it was. Like it cost me something to go on this space, and it didn't produce what I wanted.
Mm.
There's all those metrics that we think produce that kind of. It's frustrating the control again. I wanted to come home like this.
I wanted to control.
Yeah.
I wanted to come home and
Yeah.
I am peaceful and
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah.
That's one outcome. I'm not saying that's the singular outcome. I'm just saying just noticing why that is a helpful. So the next time you
Yeah.
go in, you're like, what have I done to curate a different space for my way of being? And there's little things that we can change. Very often we can't change everything all at once, nor should we. But that's it.
I
Simple
mean,
way.
this is such a theme, isn't it? Just
Yeah.
the role of surrender.
Yeah.
We're not in control.
Mm.
The practices are just an offering to God. They're
Yeah.
not a formula for project self or Christian
Exactly.
self-actualization.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're just loving acts of obedience to God.
And if it's
Yes.
transformation, it'll be the work of the Spirit that we put one unit of spiritual formation in and we see a whole life change because his work is in us, as opposed to our
Yeah.
effort equals.
Yes.
You know what I mean? There's just something about that. There'll be a day when we've all had this experience where we're just, your spouse notices or whatever. Someone says like, oh, you're grumpy, you feel grumpy, and yet your spouse sees you, your partner, maybe it's your coworker, who sees you in a way that is kind. And you're like, that wouldn't have been my response
Nope.
a
Yeah.
year ago. I can't name why that was, but that's good.
Again, and it's
Yeah.
both and. You will have times when you come out of solitude
Yeah.
and you're grumpy and you
Yeah.
get in a fight with your teenage kid. Hypothetical scenario.
Yeah. Never happened to you.
Has never happened to
Yeah.
me. Then you'll have other times when you go into solitude, kind of expecting. I had this very recent, this summer at the end of our vacation. We had a couple weeks off. We were staying with friends. And I, with my wife's full blessing, said, hey, can I just go take a day? I'll come back for dinner. We'll do a super fun family night and just take a solitude day. She said, great, go for it. Just went to a park, just drove and went to this large kind
Amazing.
of park out of nowhere. Didn't cost a penny. Got up early, went, came back before dinner. And I honestly wasn't expecting much. I'm in kind of vacation mode, I wasn't in a ton of pain at the time. And there's this issue in my heart that has been there for about 2 years that I've just not been able to get free of. And I almost like unexpectedly had this profound, I don't know how to put it into words, and I could be misreading it. I just felt like the Spirit imputed change into my heart.
Wow.
And I just
Oh,
sitting
that's
there
good.
and I just felt like all of a sudden this thing that for 2 years I've not been able to do, I all of a sudden just felt like a capacity to do it.
Wow.
And that was, maybe 8 weeks ago. And I've been a
Thank you,
profoundly
Jesus. Yeah.
different in this area of my
Wow.
life since then. So, I
Wow.
mean, that's the thing. Sometimes you go into
Yes.
solitude, encounter, and it feels like grace.
Yeah.
it's
You know what I
just-
mean? And
that
other
is
times you feel
grace.
like I'm disciplined,
Yeah.
my phone is off, I'm doing the things, and you come home, you're like, I'm not even sure I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
And again, this is the mystery of the gospel. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the more you take your spiritual formation seriously, the more you will realize how broken you are
Yeah.
Yeah.
and how desperately in need of mercy,
Yes.
and that the more that feels like good news.
Yes.
Yeah. It's good news.
Mm.
Hi, I'm Caleb. I'm in my late teens, starting to look at potential universities and obviously still living at home. I live in Wiltshire in the UK, and my question is, how can I practice solitude as a teenager?
Caleb, you sound like you're about 34.
You really do.
Sounds
Or 24.
older than me.
Amazing.
No 17-year-old wants to sound 34. I meant that in a good way.
Yeah, great. You have a
Caleb,
great
you sound
voice.
amazing. Thank you for asking
Yeah.
that question, Caleb.
That's a really good question.
There aren't right answers to this stuff, huh?
Yeah.
As the parent of a 17-year-old who's about to graduate high school and 2 other freshmen, chatting to my kids about their life, the world they're growing up in, that in some ways is very similar to the one I did, in some ways is very different. I think one of the greatest things you can do is just put away your phone,
Mm.
which is such a simple but radical act.
Yeah.
Like have regular periods where you are away from your phone
Yeah.
and it's off. And they don't have to be big, profound. I went on a retreat to a monastery as a high schooler. They can be, hey, every night I turn my phone off at 8 p.m. and I just kind of
Mm-hmm.
crawl into bed. I relax. Whatever you do, play guitar. But just creating those moments
Mm-hmm.
of quiet,
Yeah.
for God to come to you.
And some, not long past, your teen years was the season of loads of solitude. Like just think about growing up in a place like my dad grew up in Ohio. He could just come home from school, and if he wasn't working, he could just walk into the backyard and go spend hours in the woods.
Yeah, that's true.
There's something about that.
Less responsibility.
The responsibility, yeah. Not to say you
for
don't.
sure.
I think there's more responsibility now in a lot of kids because of the preparation.
Yes.
The teen years feel like adult teen is
More heightened.
Is
Yeah.
heightened, and there's an anticipation of what's next. This is a perfect season to mark those spaces out by, hey, what don't I have? Okay, I don't have homework. I don't have maybe a full-time job. I don't have, I know plenty of people that actually do, and it's very much a different, working at a university, you saw the difference in students who came in with full-time jobs at 18.
Mm-hmm.
Very different. But there are margin that you have. You don't have family obligations usually. You don't have a spouse or kids, and you have margin to go to the beach if you live by the beach and
Yeah.
spend a half day. Go.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it's again, nature's a great and free space. If you live by a big public park, take long walks. Like, I think it's a beautiful time where you can actually, there's a combating of a world that's pressing in around you, just like you said, John Mark, that I think is a beautiful season to come into your 20s with that kind of habit that will be life-changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to cultivate digital resistance,
Yeah.
and you have to utilize the gift of that time, and
Yeah.
then just enjoy it, and not
Yeah.
there's all sorts of, Caleb, there's all sorts of developmental psychology around like male initiation rites,
Yeah.
and men your age, your boys your age becoming men, and that process of going from a boy to a man. And all of them, in all traditional and indigenous cultures, initiation rites all involve time in solitude.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They all involve going away
Yeah.
Yeah.
Separation.
from your family, from
Yep.
what's normal, from who you've been, time in the wilderness, time alone,
Yeah.
and then coming back transformed. And I actually think solitude is almost like a little micro initiation process for
Yeah.
all of us,
Absolutely.
regardless of your gender or your age. It's like you have the normal, you have the status quo, you go away.
Mm-hmm.
There's a transformation, there's fear, there's danger, there's aloneness, there's loneliness,
Yeah.
there's
Identity
transformation,
discovery.
identity
Yeah.
comes up,
Identity.
and then you come back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like a practice to this where you
Yeah.
do it all the time, but then there's a whole life stage, and the adolescent years aren't actually the only ones. I mean,
Yeah.
for sure,
Mhm.
midlife is another, and no life follows a script. There are different seasons in life where our identity has to be changed,
Yeah.
and the role we've played has to be changed, and our maturity has to radically climb up.
Yeah.
And so there are both seasons of life where we really need to embrace that. And then
Yeah.
there's just this micro practice of like a little mini version
Yeah.
when we go away for an hour or two. But I think, man, lean into that.
Yeah.
Let God do this in you. Let
Yeah.
God take you out, transform you, give you a new identity, a sense of call, and then bring you back in to love
Yeah.
and serve your community.
Yeah. I think, it's funny, not that this is helpful to you, Caleb, but maybe it would be. But I think about some of the most profound moments in my teenage years, and they are in moments of solitude. I wouldn't have called it that then.
Yeah.
I think the emotional weight of some of the things I was carrying in that season forced me into that. I didn't know what it was. But when I think back, I think, wow, that's when I really became the person who learned how to hear God's voice
Yeah.
and how to respond to it. So I don't know if that's encouraging, but I do think
Yeah.
there's massive significance to taking a walk, to, for me at the time, it was like sitting in a specific place in my room.
Yeah, I was not going to monasteries
Yeah.
when I was a senior in high school. My bedroom
Definitely
comes to mind. I just remember
wasn't.
sitting on the
Yeah.
bed. Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah. Or, listening to Jeremy Camp in the background or whatever it was. But having these significant moments of encounter that were probably 15 minutes long,
Mm.
but each one made a massive difference in who I became.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
well done, Caleb.
Yeah. Great
Yeah.
question.
Well, guys, I think this is a wrap.
Such a gift to be
Season
with you.
4,
So good.
Solitude. Such a gift to be with both of you.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts?
I just think I love that you ended with that conversation about the
Mhm.
going out and coming back. I think
Mhm.
that is such a simple and profound reality for a world that is trying to stake claim and identity.
Yeah.
For you to just every day in some small way put a resistance to that.
Remember who you are.
Just remember who you are and
Yeah.
invite the Holy Spirit. And again, it doesn't have to be a somber thing. It might be a hard season of solitude, but it can be a joyous one too. And the Spirit is so gentle.
Yeah.
Mhm. You can trust him.
Mm.
Yeah.
You do not have to be afraid.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
That's
good.
the phrase in my mind. It's do not be afraid and embrace the tension,
Mm.
knowing that it's leading to transformation.
Yep.
That's
It's
as I'm
beautiful.
leaving this, I'm thinking the tension is where the transformation begins.
And start small. I'm thinking of, John's
Mhm.
line, don't try to be heroic.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
which
a
I
great
loved.
line. Don't try to be
It
heroic.
was so convicting.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Uh.
For all the people that are like, nah, and just kind of lazy about it, there's us other losers that are like, I'm gonna do it so hardcore.
I'm gonna
The
show you
opposite of
how this is
This is a
done.
different kind of psychosis.
Yeah.
But just start small. Start where you are. Take steps.
Mhm.
Mm.
Be exceedingly gracious with yourself because
Mm.
God is far more than you can imagine.
Mm.
Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the Circle and all of our givers who made this entire podcast possible. Bryan and Bethany, thank you for your time as conversation partners. Love you both so much. And we'll be back, God willing, with another season in the not too distant future. In the meantime, the peace of Christ.